Ladies and gents, Censorship reaction. This is the 1918 flu pandemic, trench fever, Censorship Part 2 by the channel Extra Credits. The flu arrived in France. It found a pleasant home in the crowded wartime trenches, much to the dismay of the Allies who tried to keep the flu a secret. When it made its way to Madrid, not subject to wartime censorship, it picked up the nickname Spanish flu. Yeah, okay, that's why Spanish flu, because everybody in the US and, basically Allied forces try to keep it a secret because, of course, they would, right? They can't let the enemy know that, oh, look at that. They are suffering from some, virus or something. And that would definitely make them weaker and, give Germany was already way too aggressive in World War I. That would have given them more reason to keep attacking. But when it reached Madrid, obviously people found out. That's the thing with the flus, right? They get the name where they get found out, right? I mean, usually it's where it's originated, right? Or where it found out. I don't know about that. Maybe it's where the virus is found. That's where the name gets. Or maybe it's from the origin, I think, right? Because there are lots of viruses that originated in China and have the Chinese name. Maybe it's because they were founded in China at the time. I don't know. Somebody comment down. What is it? Is it where it's found out or where it's originated from? I think it's where it's originated from. So I guess they just didn't know. So they just called it Spanish flu at the time. Yeah. Let's go this one. Remember, people, if you like my reaction, don't like subscribe. Check out the reaction. There's a link in the description. Check out the class. Please click the link cards and yeah, let's watch it.
It stalked into camp when the day was damp and chilly and cold. It crept by the guards and murdered my pards, with a hand that was clammy and bony and bold. And its breath was icy and moldy and dank, and it killed so speedy and gloatingly greedy, that it took away men from each company rank. Private Joshua Lee, 34th Infantry Division, 1919.
To him. Guy became poet.
When we left off, the 1918 flu was aboard troop transports headed for the battlefields of France. And though this first wave of the virus was comparatively mild, its time in the trenches would reforge it into a hardened killer of men and help tip the balance of the war. In early April, it erupted among the American troops.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. Given bad conditions like trench warfare, virus would get stronger, right? Now somebody would think, why does virus care which condition it is? Virus doesn't care. Virus care only reason that people who are fighting in trenches, they are not in good health, right? Their immune system are immensely weak. So viruses only get stronger when they get passed on over and over again until they die off. So if, virus basically is in somebody's body, right? They survive there for a long time before it kills them. And then it jumps to somebody else. Now there, it even mutates more. It has more chances of mutating now. So the more virus jumps body, the more it has chance to become stronger and adapt to the environment. That's what happens in bad conditions like this in trench warfare. So this condition was just effed up all around, right? I mean, there's a massive virus outbreak there, mutated influenza virus, Spanish flu basically. And the war is going on, and one of the worst condition warfare of all time, World War I trench warfare, that massive trench between France and Germany. In there, it spread. This was, for the virus, this was the best condition it could have ever gotten. That's just effed up.
Troops at their disembarkation ground in Brest. By April 10th, the first cases began showing up in the French army, which generally trained and served alongside American units. It was hard to notice at first. High fever, headache, and weakness could come from many diseases that swirled around the trenches, such as insect-borne trench fever or typhus. But it soon became clear that this was different. The troops called it 3-day fever, knock-me-down fever, or la grippe. It rarely killed, but men who got it were out of action for days and lead-footed for weeks. The overcrowded camps and trenches of the Western Front were ideal tinder for an epidemic. Men lived within inches of each other, their immune systems compromised from exhaustion and disease. And unlike a city where the virus might run out of victims, here, fresh bodies were rotated onto the line every few days. It spread to the British.
Oh my god, I just thought of that. Oh, that's just effed up, right? Battle of the Somme. How effed up it is, how effed up we as humans are. Usually, when conditions are like this, it's usually virus are the reason why people are left and right dying and the new people has to come, right? In a city. Right? If somebody died in the job, somebody had to fill that seat because of the virus. This was the first time the conditions were like that. Virus were killing less people than people during the Battle of Somme, right? The virus needed host, so the hosts don't get run out of. But hosts were getting killed more by themselves than by the viruses. Virus was jumping from people to people, and before virus can even mutate, those people died by the machine guns in the trenches. How effed up that is, man.
In early May, and by then, there was no hope of containment. It swept through them like a bad spirit. English hospitals saw over 36,000 admissions for flu in a single month. Only then, when it began undermining the troops' ability to fight, did military doctors raise the alarm. The outbreak had sprung up during a critical phase of the war. The Germans had launched a massive spring offensive, and
yeah, that is so fucked up about military, right? During the wartime, they only see soldiers as tools. They can't fight. Now it's an issue.
Allied generals needed every man possible on the line. But as spring turned to summer, the frontline hospitals of the Allies swelled to overcapacity. Men on the front lines would get ready to rotate to the rear, only to find that the unit ordered to relieve them had instead gone into quarantine. Medical tents had run out of space, and some hospitals took to laying patients outside on canvas tarps. In late May, a group of French recruits came down with it. 69% of them had to be hospitalized, and 5% died. By the end of the summer, 10% of the British Army had fallen ill. Back in Washington, D.C., Welch and his epidemiologists finally took notice. The flu, previously ignored, became a matter of national security. They set about turning the Rockefeller Institute into an information gathering and communications center for the disease. Welch wanted anything he could get his hands on: reports, lung samples, information on treatment, so he dispatched doctors to centers of infection to swab throats and collect samples. But all of it remained a closely guarded secret. No one wanted the Central Powers to know that the Allies were being weakened by disease. Upon entering the war, both the US and Britain had clamped down on the press with unprecedented censorship measures. When American officers denied or minimized reports of the flu, newspapers at home accepted it without question.
It is tricky how we see certain things necessary opposed to not, right? Freedom of speech and freedom is just, untouchable. Freedom of the press is untouchable. But if it's war going on, I mean, yeah, it could be censored. I mean, this is, obviously this is necessary pick and choose, but it's still pick and choose, right? It's not 100% like, freedom is just untouchable. You cannot touch it regardless of what. Obviously, I understand that during the wartime, you can't let it escape. But as a philosophy, it's weird to think about.
The British, for their part, tried to strangle any mention of the spreading plague. But with the virus now infecting the civilian population, news of an epidemic started to leak. In May, the virus arrived in Madrid. And since Spain was neutral, it wasn't subject to wartime censorship.
Yeah.
There, the flu made front-page news, especially once it infected the king. It whipped through Spanish cities, passing from person to person so fast that local wits named it after a hit opera song, The Naples Soldier. It was as catchy as the song, the joke went, if more deadly. International newspapers picked up the story on the Madrid outbreak and, erroneously, assumed the disease had originated there.
So during that time, people had the balls to at least make a joke about a situation like this. At least they were more freer than today's, I see nothing, I say nothing, I hear nothing. The very close-knit community, even this, YouTube and everywhere. Somebody makes a joke about pandemic, where the pandemic was really strong. During that time, anybody makes a pandemic joke, people just got pissed off. It's like people suddenly have very thin skin. People make jokes to ease the tension. It doesn't mean people are malicious or something. Come on.
And from those articles, the killer gained another name, the Spanish flu. But it wasn't just the Allies covering up the flu's impact. On the other side of no man's land, the German commander, General Ludendorff, was also wrestling with the disease. Ludendorff had gained day-to-day command of the German military in 1916, along with a huge amount of political power. And he'd used it to embark on a bold plan to save the Kaiser and Germany. And to be honest, it hadn't gone so well. First, he'd planned to crush the Allied supply lines with unrestricted submarine warfare. Instead, it had helped drag America into the conflict. Now, 84,000 Americans were arriving on the Western Front each month.
Yeah, basically he thought that submarines are untouchable. He was kind of right? You can't see submarine, and nobody had submarines at the time, U-boats. But the point is, British Army was way too big. British Navy was way too big for them to, afford to send U-boats after U-boats to sink things. And, your British Navy was adapting as well, finding techniques to make sure where is U-boat or not. So it didn't work, and like he said, it dragged the USA in.
But that would be a surmountable problem if he could knock Russia out of the war and free up the troops fighting on the Eastern Front. Luckily for him, a revolution had broken out against the Tsar. And to fuel the chaos, he helped transport a famous Bolshevik revolutionary, one Vladimir Lenin, back to Russia. The plan worked. Kinda. Ludendorff had hoped the strict peace terms he'd foisted on Russia would scare other allies into opening negotiations. But instead, the harsh treaty only had convinced them that peace was not possible until they achieved total victory, and forced an equally punishing treaty on Germany. But at least Ludendorff now had his 50 divisions from the Eastern Front.
Yeah, Germany thought that, acts like that would basically force other countries to basically seek, peace treaties and things like that. Like, Germany is fighting some inferior countries, which is like some third world countries who will get scared. I mean, it's Britain, USA, all the Allied forces. That doesn't matter how badly you do things in the Eastern Front or whatever. They are not going to just point blank get scared of the Germany suddenly. The only thing they're going to think that, okay, Germany is unreasonable right now. Only thing we have to do is win. So let's do that.
And he'd use them for one more, all-or-nothing shot at winning the war. He'd retrained the freed-up veterans as assault specialists, stormtroopers, and launched his massive spring offensive in hopes of securing victory before the Americans arrived in force. As the offensive began, Ludendorff's army had better trained troops, superior tactics, higher morale, and for a brief time, numerical superiority. And at the beginning, it all went so well. German troops had captured more territory than they had since 1914 and driven a wedge between the British and the French. But the Allies had held on to the strategic port roads and railroad junctions. All the ground that Ludendorff captured was worthless, shell-churned dirt. And they'd taken a lot of casualties. So the next phase of the operation was critical. But as he began to organize for a final push, his generals requested a delay. The German army, you see, had the flu. They'd caught it in June, probably from a British prisoner of war, and by July it was sweeping the ranks. German troops, their systems already weak from food rationing, appeared especially susceptible to infection.
There you go. That's, virus is basically another, window to see that with all these borders and things that people draw of countries is arbitrary. Because viruses, which is force of nature, force of nature, whatever. Virus basically does not discriminate. It doesn't matter if you're the Allied forces or Central forces or whatever. Virus is gonna attack everybody, and this is like virus's best day ever. And, bodies everywhere now. They are even going after German. Virus is attacking German forces as well.
Infection. 500,000 soldiers were sick. In some units, a quarter of the men were too ill to fight. Ludendorff delayed the attack 5 days. After that, the commanders would just have to deal with the reduced unit strength. Meanwhile, the Allies, who had caught the flu earlier in the spring and summer, were recovering. Despite sickness, exhaustion, and casualty depletion, on July 15th, the German army marshaled for their one last attack. A rolling bombardment pounded the French and American lines as they advanced. Stormtroopers rushed behind with fast-moving infiltration tactics. Gas shells turned the battlefield into a chemical hell. But the French, British, and Americans held and counterattacked. And they would keep counterattacking for 100 days, pushing the Germans back step by step. Ludendorff had failed. Within weeks, he was shut in his office, suffering a nervous breakdown. And by October, he was fleeing across the Swedish border in sunglasses and a fake beard. Now, it would be wrong to say the flu defeated Ludendorff's spring offensive because there were other factors. It was an overambitious operation with a nebulous goal. He kept changing the objectives, units outran their supply lines, and he lost too many men. But German accounts do suggest the flu bled the army's manpower and resolve at a critical moment. And just as it had tipped the balance, it was gone. In August, British hospitalizations fell to the point that they had declared the epidemic over. But it wasn't over. For as the balance of the war was shifting, so were the virus's genes. Even today, no one's sure what happened. Perhaps the original, deadly virus had temporarily mutated into a mild strain, only to have its lethality re-emerge. Or it may have infected someone, even an animal, that had a different version of the flu and the two viruses combined. It's even possible that, as it passed through millions of soldiers, this avian virus was gradually adapting itself to human hosts. Most frightening of all, the war itself may have given it a nudge, because the soldiers the flu infected had been exposed to a chemical agent known to cause genetic mutation.
Damn.
Mustard gas.
Oh,
The
yeah.
soldiers' throat and lung cells, laced with chemical weapons, may have helped increase the rate of genetic shift and raise the likelihood that a new strain would develop. However it happened, the virus that emerged from the trenches was both highly contagious and severely lethal. It could kill within 24 hours of presenting symptoms, drowning a patient in their own fluids. And while common flu strains primarily kill the very old and very young, the 1918 flu struck people down in the prime of life. The mild first wave was over, and the second lethal wave was about to begin. In fact, it was already making itself known on the troop ships delivering soldiers to nations across the globe. The Naples soldier was on the march.
God damn, that's just heavy. After symptoms shows up, the person dies in 24 hours. Damn. I mean, it looks, the Spanish flu mutated strain of influenza is similar to what we had last year. But it was more deadlier because the conditions that it adapted to, right? It mutated in the conditions of, World War I trench warfare. Everybody's immune system was weak, so it had more chance to survive rather than immune system killing it. So it jumped from person to person, mutating, and then something like mustard gas helped it. And it became so adapted to human body that it became very deadly. Damn, I mean, look, this is like tens and tens of millions of deaths, right? We are not even close to that, what we had last year, and it's still going on. But, during that World War I time, I think people didn't realize it as much like how we realized about the pandemic that just happened, because the World War I was going on and people are already dying way too much. And, apart from some mentions here and there, usually whenever some World War I series is going on from some channel or something, nobody mentions this pandemic, but it was very vital part of the war, right? Rarely anybody mentions this pandemic during the wartime. Let's talk about the war aspects. But clearly this, flu helped lots of situations as well, like how Allied forces was recovering while Germany suddenly attacked, and Germany was just, just had the pandemic, so they were weaker in a way. So that might not be the decisive thing, but it definitely helped. Alright people, that was the 1918 flu pandemic trench fever. Well, that's an extra credits. If you like my Rick's, don't forget to like, subscribe. Check out the Rick's, there's a link in the description. Check out the cast for plays, check out the end cards, and yeah, I'll see you next time.